The stone chamber of the council hall pressed down on Seraphina Blackwood like a tomb, its ancient walls carved with the names of generations of fertile mothers, names that would never include hers. She stood motionless before the semicircle of elders, their weathered faces carved from granite and disapproval, while the parchment in Elder Matthias's gnarled hands sealed her fate with the finality of a death sentence. Barren. The word echoed through the chamber like a curse. The medical examination confirms what we suspected. Seraphina Blackwood possesses no capacity to bear children. Her womb is. He paused, savoring the cruelty. Empty. Cursed. Worthless to the Moonhaven Pack's bloodline. Sera's fingers trembled at her sides, but she refused to let them see her break. Not here. Not in front of them. The iron scent of her own blood filled her nostrils as her nails bit into her palms, the only anchor keeping her from drowning in the sea of their disgust. To her left, her mother Helena stood rigid as a marble statue, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair catching the torchlight, her blue eyes, so like Sera's own, devoid of maternal warmth. Her father Richard flanked her right side, his broad shoulders squared with the authority of the pack's head beta, his jaw set with the cold calculation that had made him wealthy and powerful. Neither looked at her. They hadn't looked at her with love in years. The bloodline must be preserved, Elder Matthias continued, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The Blackwood name has produced strong wolves for 3 centuries. But this. His milky eyes fixed on Sera with undisguised revulsion. This abomination threatens everything we've built. Heat flared in Sera's chest, not the warm glow of her wolf, which had been mysteriously absent since her 18th birthday 3 months ago, but the sharp burn of rage. Abomination. As if her worth as a person could be reduced to the functionality of her reproductive organs. The council has reached a decision, another elder announced, his voice crisp with authority. Seraphina Blackwood will be removed from Pack bloodline records. Her mating prospects within Moonhaven are hereby terminated. A collective intake of breath swept through the handful of Pack members who'd been permitted to witness her public humiliation. Sera's heart hammered against her ribs. Terminated. As if she'd ever had real prospects to begin with. Furthermore, Elder Matthias's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. The Blackwood family has graciously arranged alternative accommodations. The word graciously dripped with sarcasm, and Sera's blood turned to ice. She turned to stare at her parents, finally forcing them to meet her gaze. Her mother's face remained impassive, but a muscle ticked in her father's jaw. Accommodations? Sera's voice cracked despite her best efforts. The Shadowmere Pack has expressed interest in your services. Elder Matthias smiled, the expression transforming his face into something reptilian. As a servant, of course. Your domestic skills, while unremarkable, are adequate for their needs. The chamber tilted around her. Shadowmere Pack, notorious for their brutality, their treatment of servants as barely better than slaves. They were the boogeyman stories mothers told their children, the Pack whose very name made seasoned warriors cross themselves. You sold me. The words escaped her lips as barely more than a whisper, but in the stone chamber, they echoed like a shout. We arranged a mutually beneficial agreement, her father said, his voice steady and businesslike, as if they were discussing livestock rather than his own daughter. Shadowmere Pack will provide compensation for your relocation, and you'll have purpose despite your limitations. Compensation. They were being paid for her like she was cattle. Richard. The voice that cut through the chamber belonged to Beta Marcus Thornfield, her childhood friend, the boy who'd promised to mate her when they came of age. He stepped forward from where he'd been standing with the other unmated males, his auburn hair catching the torchlight, his green eyes that had once looked at her with such warmth, now cold as winter frost. Hope flared in her chest like a dying ember. Marcus would speak for her. He would. I formally reject Seraphina Blackwood as a potential mate, Marcus announced, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. I cannot risk weakening my bloodline or disappointing the Pack with a barren female. The Thornfield name deserves better. The ember of hope died, crushed under the weight of his betrayal. Sera stared at him, at the boy who'd held her hand during storm nights, who'd promised they'd run away together if their parents ever tried to force them apart, who'd kissed her behind the old oak tree just last month and sworn his eternal devotion. Marcus. Her voice broke on his name. He didn't even look at her. I announce my intention to court Lydia Ashworth instead. A fertile female worthy of bearing future betas. The chamber erupted in approving murmurs. Lydia, standing with the other eligible females, preened under the attention, her dark hair gleaming and her curves displayed to advantage in a dress that cost more than most families made in a year. An excellent choice, Elder Matthias approved. The Ashworth bloodline has produced 13 children in the last generation alone. 13. The number hit Sera like a physical blow. This is madness. The shout came from an unexpected source, her brother Damien, stepping forward from his position with the other young males. For a moment, wild hope flared again. Damien, 2 years older and built like their father, had always been protective of her. Surely he would. This humiliation reflects poorly on the entire Blackwood family, Damien declared, his dark eyes blazing with righteous anger. Having a barren sister is a stain on our honor that will follow us for generations. She should have been sent away quietly, not subjected to this public spectacle that embarrasses us all. The hope died so completely that Sera wondered if she'd ever truly felt it at all. Damien, she whispered. Don't. His voice cut like a blade. You've brought enough shame on our name, Seraphina. At least have the dignity to accept your fate quietly. A stain on the family honor. Her own brother, the boy who'd taught her to climb trees, who'd snuck her extra desserts when their parents weren't looking, who'd once bloodied the nose of a boy who'd called her ugly, saw her as nothing more than an embarrassment to be disposed of. The matter is settled, Elder Matthias declared with obvious satisfaction. Seraphina Blackwood has 24 hours to gather her belongings and prepare for departure. The Shadowmere delegation will arrive tomorrow at sunset. 24 hours, Sera repeated numbly. Be grateful for the mercy, her mother finally spoke, her voice crisp and emotionless. Most would have exiled you immediately. Mercy. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. The formal session dissolved into smaller conversations, pack members clustering together to whisper about the morning's entertainment. Sera stood frozen in place, watching her life crumble around her like ancient parchment exposed to flame. Marcus approached Lydia, already playing the devoted suitor. Her parents spoke in low tones with Elder Matthias, no doubt finalizing the financial arrangements of her sale. Her brother accepted congratulations from his friends for his wise distancing from his defective sister. No one looked at her. She might as well have been invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of their world. Finally, her legs remembered how to move. She walked from the chamber on unsteady feet, ignoring the whispers that followed her like a malevolent wind. The corridors of the pack house, the only home she'd ever known, felt alien now, hostile. Portraits of distinguished ancestors seemed to stare down at her with accusation, their painted eyes tracking her shameful retreat. Her small room on the 3rd floor had never felt more like a cell. She sat heavily on the narrow bed, staring at the sparse furnishings that represented 21 years of existence. A few books, some simple clothes, a carved wooden wolf her grandfather had made for her 5th birthday. The sum total of Seraphina Blackwood's life could fit in a single traveling bag. Voices drifted up from the garden below, and she moved to the window despite herself. Her parents stood on the stone terrace, their heads bent together in private conversation. She shouldn't listen. She should use these final hours to prepare for whatever fresh hell awaited her in Shadowmere territory. Instead, she pressed her ear to the glass and let their words destroy what remained of her heart. Always known this day would come, her father was saying, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a successful business transaction. The moment her wolf failed to manifest, we knew she was defective. The compensation will more than cover Damien's mating expenses, her mother replied practically. And with her gone, he'll have no trouble finding a suitable female. The Ashworth girl has already shown interest. 50,000 silver, Richard's voice held unmistakable greed. More than we'd have received as a dowry for a barren daughter. Shadowmere pays well for servants. Helena's laugh held no warmth. She should thank us. We're giving her purpose she never could have achieved here. Sera's knees gave out, and she slumped against the wall. 50,000 silver. They'd negotiated her sale price like she was livestock. Her parents, the people who were supposed to love and protect her, had literally put a price on her head. Still, her mother continued, and for a moment Sera dared hope for some flicker of maternal feeling. I sometimes wonder if we should have told her about the oracle's prophecy. Sera's blood turned to ice. Helena. Her father's voice carried warning. She has a right to know, Richard. The prophecy spoke of a barren moon child, who would bring forth the greatest power the werewolf world has ever seen. What if? What if nothing? Richard's voice cut through his wife's speculation like an axe through wood. Prophecies are fairy tales for desperate fools. Our daughter is barren, powerless, and worthless to any pack's future. We made the practical choice. But if the oracle was right, then we've made 50,000 silver and rid ourselves of a liability. Win-win. His cruel chuckle made Sera's stomach turn. Besides, even if some prophecy were true, what good would ultimate power do us if we're dead from starvation because we kept feeding a useless mouth? You're right, of course, Helena conceded. She looked so broken in there. She'll heal. Or she won't. Either way, it's not our problem anymore. Their footsteps retreated into the house, leaving Sera alone with the weight of their betrayal. A prophecy. There had been a prophecy about her, and her parents had known. Had known and chosen money over their daughter's potential destiny. Barren moon child who would bring forth the greatest power. The words echoed in her mind as she mechanically began folding her few possessions. What did it mean? Why had they hidden it from her? And if she truly was destined for some great power, why couldn't she even shift into her wolf form? The questions multiplied like hydra heads, each one spawning 3 more. She'd always known she was different, her wolf's absence, her strange dreams of places she'd never seen, the way animals seemed drawn to her despite her supposed defectiveness. But a prophecy. A sharp rap on her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Seraphina. Damien's voice carried through the wood, formal and cold. Pack your things quickly. The Shadowmere delegation has arrived early. Early? The sun was barely setting. They'd said sunset tomorrow. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed her pathetic bundle of belongings and opened the door. Damien stood in the hallway, his face carved from stone, refusing to meet her eyes. They're eager to collect their new acquisition, he said, the word acquisition dripping with distaste, though whether for her or the situation, she couldn't tell. She followed him down the stairs on legs that felt like water. Through the windows, she could see the Shadowmere warriors waiting in the courtyard, 5 enormous men in black leather, their faces scarred and cruel, their eyes holding the cold calculation of professional killers. At the bottom of the stairs, her parents waited with forced smiles and anxious eyes. The transaction was about to be completed. Remember, her mother said in a low voice as they approached the door, you represent the Blackwood name even as a servant. Don't embarrass us further. Don't embarrass them. After what they'd done to her, they were worried about embarrassment. I understand, Sera replied, her voice steady despite the hurricane raging in her chest. Her father opened the door, and the Shadowmere warriors stepped forward like hungry vultures. Their leader, a massive man with ritual scars covering half his face, looked her up and down like she was livestock. This is her. His voice sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. As agreed, Richard replied smoothly. Seraphina Blackwood, age 21, trained in domestic arts, ready for service. The warrior's eyes lingered on her in a way that made her skin crawl. She's prettier than expected. The Alpha will be pleased. The way he said, pleased, made bile rise in her throat. The payment, her father prompted. One of the warriors produced a leather pouch heavy with silver coins. Richard's eyes lit up with undisguised greed as he accepted it. Pleasure doing business, the scarred leader said. Come, girl. Time to go. Sera took a step toward her new captors, her heart breaking with each inch. Behind her, her family watched with relief, eager to see the last of their shameful daughter. Then the wind changed. A howl split the evening air, long, powerful, and absolutely commanding. Every wolf in the courtyard, including the Shadowmere warriors, went rigid with instinctive submission. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the mountains and vibrating through their very bones. "What in the seven hells?" the scarred leader began. His words died as a shadow detached itself from the treeline. The largest wolf Sera had ever seen, coal-black with eyes like molten gold, padded into the courtyard with the liquid grace of a predator who feared nothing in this world or any other. The Shadowmere warriors, hardened killers who'd faced down armies, backed away from the magnificent creature like frightened children. "Impossible," her father breathed. The wolf's golden gaze swept the assembled group before settling on Sera with an intensity that stole her breath. Power rolled off the creature in waves, ancient, terrible, absolute power that made every wolf present want to bare their throats in submission. Sera alone stood tall under that burning gaze, something deep in her chest responding to the wolf's presence like a tuning fork struck by lightning. The Alpha King had come to Moonhaven. And he was looking directly at her. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 2. The transformation began like liquid moonlight poured into darkness. Sera watched, transfixed, as the massive black wolf's form shimmered and elongated, bones reshaping with fluid grace that defied nature's laws. Where moments before had stood a creature of wild beauty and lethal power, now stood a man who stole the breath from her lungs and the strength from her knees. Alpha King Lysander Nightfall was devastating in his human form. He stood well over 6 feet, his body carved from marble and shadow, every muscle defined with the precision of a master sculptor's chisel. Raven black hair fell to his shoulders in waves that caught the dying sunlight like spun silk. His face belonged on ancient coins, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and lips that spoke of both cruelty and passion. But it was his eyes that truly undid her, those same molten gold orbs that had pinned her in place as a wolf now regarded her with an intensity that seemed to strip away every pretense, every wall, every secret she'd ever harbored. He was naked, magnificently and unself-consciously so, his skin bearing the faint scars that marked a warrior who'd survived countless battles. Power radiated from him in waves so tangible that the very air seemed to thicken around him, making it difficult to breathe. This was what an apex predator looked like in human skin, beautiful, terrible, and absolutely lethal. "Your Majesty." The scarred Shadowmere leader's voice cracked like a whip as he and his men immediately dropped to one knee. "We had no knowledge, we would never have presumed." Silence. The single word from Lysander's lips carried such command that even Sera felt the compulsion to obey. His voice was silk over steel, cultured and refined but underlaid with something primal that spoke directly to the wolf's soul. "You will not speak unless I give you permission." The Shadowmere warriors pressed themselves lower, necks bared in absolute submission. Sera's own family stood frozen in shock, their faces cycling through disbelief, terror, and dawning horror at the realization of what they'd nearly done. Lysander's burning gaze never left Sera's face as he approached with the predatory grace that marked him as the most dangerous creature in any room. Seraphina Blackwood. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a promise wrapped in velvet darkness. How did he know her name? How did he know she even existed? "Your Majesty." She found her voice somehow, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. Protocol demanded she kneel, bare her throat in submission like the others, but something in his expression told her he neither expected nor wanted her subservience. "You know who I am." It wasn't a question. "Every wolf knows who you are," she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "The question is why you're here." A smile ghosted across his perfect lips, not the cruel expression she'd expected, but something almost pleased. Direct. "I appreciate that quality." He stopped mere inches away, close enough that she could smell his scent, pine and leather and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse race. Close enough that the heat from his skin warmed the evening air between them. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "I am here," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, though everyone in the courtyard strained to listen. For you. The words hit the assembled group like a lightning strike. Her father made a choking sound. Her mother swayed on her feet. Even Damien's carefully maintained composure cracked, his mouth falling open in shock. For me? Sera's heart hammered against her ribs. But I'm perfect, he finished, and the sincerity in his voice made her knees weak. Exactly what I've been searching for. Your Majesty. Her father stepped forward with the desperation of a man watching his fortune slip away. There's been a misunderstanding. We never intended to sell our daughter. The arrangement with Shadowmere was a temporary measure. A test of her resolve. Lysander's head turned with serpentine slowness toward Richard, and the temperature in the courtyard seemed to drop 10 degrees. A test. Yes. Richard's voice climbed with panic. We wanted to ensure she was worthy of better prospects. We always planned to. You lie. The words cracked like a whip. You sold your daughter to these animals for 50,000 pieces of silver. I can smell the greed on you, Beta Blackwood. It's quite distinctive. Helena stepped forward, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, tears that came far too easily to be genuine. Please, Your Majesty, you must understand. We're a humble family. We never dreamed, if we'd known you had an interest in Seraphina, we never would have considered her barren and worthless. Lysander's voice could have frozen hellfire. Arranged to sell her into sexual slavery? Allowed your son to call her a stain on the family honor? The questions hung in the air like executioner's blades. Helena's face went ash-white. From his position still kneeling in the dirt, the Shadowmere leader dared to speak. Your Majesty, if we've offended. You breathe in my presence without permission. That alone merits death. Lysander didn't even look at the man. Be grateful I have more pressing concerns than your pathetic existence. He reached into the air, and shadows seemed to coalesce in his palm, forming a leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. You want payment for your daughter? Here. He tossed the pouch at Richard's feet. It burst open, spilling gold coins across the cobblestones, more gold than Sera had ever seen in one place, easily 10 times what Shadowmere had offered. Your Majesty, this is too generous, Richard began, reaching for the scattered wealth. Lysander raised his hand, and flames erupted from nowhere, consuming the gold in seconds. The coins didn't melt, they simply ceased to exist, leaving nothing but scorch marks on the stone. That, Lysander said conversationally, is what I think of your mercenary love. The scent of sulfur and burnt metal filled the air. Richard stared at the blackened stones where his fortune had been, his face a mask of devastation. Now then. Lysander turned back to Sera, his expression gentling slightly. I'm offering you a choice, Seraphina. Come with me willingly as a candidate for my Luna, and I will ensure your safety and happiness. Refuse. He let the word hang in the air like a sword. What happens if I refuse? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Then I will assume you've been so thoroughly broken by your family's cruelty that you're unable to make rational decisions. His golden eyes hardened to amber ice. In which case, I'll destroy both packs, Moonhaven and Shadowmere, for their crimes against you, and take you anyway. Gasps echoed through the courtyard. The Shadowmere warriors pressed themselves flatter against the ground, understanding that their lives hung by the thinnest of threads. Your Majesty, Elder Matthias stepped forward on shaking legs, surely there's no need for violence. If Seraphina wishes to. Wishes? Lysander's laugh held no humor. When did any of you care what she wished? You declared her worthless and sold her to rapists and murderers. Your opinions on her wishes are less than nothing to me. Sera. The voice came from behind her, Marcus, stepping forward with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Sera, wait. You can't just leave with him. You don't know anything about him or what he really wants. She turned to look at her childhood friend, the boy who'd rejected her so publicly just hours before. Marcus. I made a mistake, he continued, his green eyes bright with desperate sincerity. I was scared, pressured by my family. But I never stopped caring about you. Don't make a decision when you're emotional. Stay, and we can work something out. Maybe we can. The words died in his throat as Lysander moved with inhuman speed. One moment he was standing beside Sera, the next he had Marcus lifted off the ground by his throat, the beta's feet dangling inches above the cobblestones. You rejected her, Lysander said, his voice deadly calm as Marcus clawed uselessly at the iron grip around his windpipe. Publicly. Cruelly. Called her unworthy of your precious bloodline. And now that the Alpha King shows interest, suddenly you care about her. Marcus's face was turning purple, his struggles growing weaker. Around the courtyard, pack members watched in frozen horror as their future beta died in front of their eyes. Please. The word tore from Sera's throat before she could stop it. Please don't kill him. Lysander's head turned toward her, his grip never loosening. He hurt you. Humiliated you in front of your entire pack. Why would you ask mercy for him? Because I'm not like you. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. I don't kill people for saying things I don't like. Something flickered in those golden depths, surprise, perhaps even approval. Interesting. He released his grip, letting Marcus crash to the ground in a gasping heap. The beta rolled onto his side, sucking in desperate breaths while his pack members rushed to his aid. Consider that your one warning, Beta Thornfield, Lysander said conversationally. Approach what belongs to me again, and I'll tear your throat out with my teeth. Belongs to him? Sera's temper flared. I don't belong to anyone. No, he agreed, turning back to her with that predatory grace. You don't. But you will choose to belong with me. The confidence in his voice should have infuriated her. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her veins in a way that was entirely inappropriate given the circumstances. Why? She asked. Why me? You could have any female in the werewolf world. Why would you want someone who's broken? Broken? His eyebrows rose. You think you're broken? I can't shift. I can't bear children. I'm everything a Luna isn't supposed to be. You're everything a Luna is supposed to be, he corrected, moving closer until she had to crane her neck to maintain eye contact. Strong. Brave. Compassionate even toward those who've wronged you. And yes, barren. The last word hit her like a slap. You want me because I can't have children? I need you because you can't have children, he said, and the distinction in his phrasing didn't escape her notice. There are circumstances that make it essential my Luna be unable to conceive. I've been searching for someone like you for centuries. Centuries. The casual way he mentioned the span of time reminded her that she was dealing with a creature far older and more powerful than she could comprehend. What circumstances? She pressed. That, he said with finality, is a conversation for another time. Right now, you need to make a choice, Seraphina. Come with me, or watch everything you've ever known burn. The threat wasn't idle, she could see it in his eyes, feel it in the power that rolled off him in waves. He would do exactly as he promised, and sleep peacefully afterward. If I come with you, she said slowly, what exactly are you offering me? A chance to discover who you really are. A life where you're valued for your strength rather than condemned for your supposed weaknesses. A home where no one will ever sell you again. The words painted a picture so beautiful it made her chest ache. But experience had taught her to be wary of promises that seemed too good to be true. And if I don't prove suitable as your Luna? Then you'll remain under my protection as an honored member of my pack until you choose to leave. You'd let me leave? I'm not your family, Seraphina. I don't chain those I care about with guilt and manipulation. Freedom given freely is the only kind worth having. Behind her, she could hear her mother weeping, whether from fear or genuine sorrow, she couldn't tell. Her father stood like a statue, his dreams of wealth turned to ash at his feet. Damien watched with unreadable eyes, and Marcus remained on the ground, surrounded by concerned pack members. These people had been her entire world. They'd also betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. Lysander's smile was devastating in its beauty. "Wise choice." "Seraphina, no." Her mother's voice cracked like breaking glass. "You don't understand what you're doing. The oracle's prophecy, it spoke of doom as well as power. You'll destroy everything you touch, daughter. Everyone you love will die because of what you are." The words hit the courtyard like a curse-given voice. Several pack members crossed themselves, and even the Alpha King's expression sharpened with interest. "Prophecy," he murmured, his golden gaze fixed on Helena's tear-streaked face. "The barren moon child," Helena continued, her voice rising to near hysteria. "Born under the dark moon, blessed and cursed in equal measure. She will bring forth the greatest power, but at the cost of everything she holds dear. Death follows in her wake, destruction in her shadow." "Enough." Richard grabbed his wife's arm, trying to silence her, but the damage was done. Lysander looked at Sera with new intensity, as if seeing her for the first time. "A prophecy. How illuminating." "You knew," Sera accused, turning on her parents with fury finally breaking free. "You've known all along what I might be, and you chose to sell me anyway." "We chose to save our family from the destruction you represent," her father shot back. "The oracle's words were clear, death and ruin follow wherever you go. We couldn't risk." "You couldn't risk losing your precious reputation," she spat. "Even knowing I might be destined for something greater, you chose money over your own daughter. And now they'll live with that choice for the rest of their considerably shortened lives," Lysander said pleasantly. The casual threat in his tone made several pack members take involuntary steps backward. He offered Sera his arm with courtly grace. "Shall we go, my dear? I find myself eager to learn more about this prophecy." She looked back once at the place that had been her home, at the people who had shaped her world. They stared back with mixtures of fear, regret, and relief that the cursed daughter was finally someone else's problem. "Goodbye," she said simply, and placed her hand on the Alpha King's arm. The last thing she heard as they walked toward the forest was her mother's voice, cracked and broken, calling after her, "The prophecy will be your doom, Seraphina. You'll destroy everything you touch. Everyone you love will pay the price." But Sera didn't look back. She walked into the darkness beside the most dangerous man in the werewolf world, and for the first time in her life, felt like she might finally be going home. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 3. The Nightfall royal estate rose from the ancient forest like a dark jewel carved from midnight and moonlight. Sera pressed her face to the carriage window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared up at the Gothic spires that seemed to pierce the star-studded sky itself. Gargoyles perched on every corner, their stone faces twisted into expressions of eternal vigilance, while ivy crept up the massive walls like seeking fingers trying to reclaim the structure for the wild. "It's magnificent," she whispered, then immediately felt foolish for the admission. Beside her, Lysander's lips curved into what might have been a smile. "It's been my family's seat for over 1,000 years. Every stone has been soaked in Nightfall blood, every hall has echoed with our triumphs and tragedies." The carriage wheels crunched over gravel as they approached the main gates, towering iron barriers worked with wolves and crescent moons, flanked by guard towers that could have withstood a siege. As they passed through, Sera caught glimpses of manicured gardens where night-blooming flowers released their perfume into the cool air, and fountains carved from black marble that caught the moonlight like liquid silver. But it was the sense of familiarity that truly unsettled her. She'd never been here before, had never even traveled beyond Moonhaven's borders, yet something deep in her bones recognized this place. The way the shadows fell across the cobblestones, the angle of the towers against the sky, even the scent of the night air tinged with ancient magic, it all felt like coming home. "Strange," Lysander murmured, his golden eyes studying her face with that unnerving intensity. "You look as though you've seen a ghost." "I feel like I have," she admitted, unable to shake the eerie sensation that she'd walked these grounds before. The carriage drew to a halt before the main entrance, where a small army of servants waited in perfect formation. At their head stood a man who could only be Lysander's beta, tall and lean with auburn hair and intelligent gray eyes that missed nothing. He stepped forward as Lysander emerged from the carriage, offering his arm to help Sera down. "Your Majesty," the beta said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to command. "Welcome home. And you must be Miss Blackwood." His smile was genuine, warming his austere features. "I'm Kieran McCready, beta of the Royal Pack. It's an honor to meet you." "Just Sera, please," she replied, accepting his offered hand. There was something immediately likable about Kieran, a steadiness that reminded her of an anchor in a storm. "Kieran has been my beta and closest friend for the better part of 2 centuries, Lysander explained, moving to her other side with that predatory grace. "If there's anything you need during your stay, he'll see that you have it." 2 centuries? Sera's eyes widened. "How old are you?" "Old enough to have learned patience," Lysander replied with dark humor. "Young enough to still be capable of surprise. You, Miss Blackwood, are full of surprises." Before she could ask what he meant, a commotion near the castle's entrance drew their attention. A group of women emerged onto the steps, their beauty so striking it seemed to illuminate the night air around them. They moved with the fluid grace of those born to power, their expensive gowns rustling like whispered secrets. "Ah," Kieran said under his breath. "The other candidates." Other candidates. The words hit Sera like a physical blow. She'd known, intellectually, that she wouldn't be the only woman vying for the position of Luna. But seeing them, these goddesses of perfection with their flawless faces and voluptuous curves, drove home just how outclassed she truly was. The woman at their head was particularly stunning. Tall and willowy with platinum blonde hair that fell to her waist in waves, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that belonged in fairy tales. Her ice-blue eyes swept over Sera with calculating assessment before dismissing her as thoroughly as one might dismiss a servant. "Your Majesty," the blonde said, her voice cultured and melodious as she executed a perfect curtsy. "Welcome home. We've been eagerly awaiting your return." "Vivian." Lysander's acknowledgement was polite but distant. "Ladies. Allow me to present Seraphina Blackwood, our newest candidate." The temperature on the steps seemed to drop several degrees. Vivian's perfect smile sharpened into something that belonged on a blade. "Seraphina Blackwood," she repeated, as if tasting the name and finding it wanting. "From Moonhaven Pack, I assume?" How quaint. The insult was wrapped in silk, but it cut nonetheless. Sera lifted her chin, refusing to show weakness. "And you are?" "Vivian Ashford, daughter of the European Council Alpha and current head candidate." Her smile widened, showing perfect white teeth. "I do hope you'll find your stay here educational." The other women tittered behind their hands, the sound like breaking glass. Sera recognized the dynamic immediately. She was the outsider, the threat to be neutralized or driven away. "I'm sure I will," Sera replied evenly. "I've always been a quick study." "Oh, I'm certain you are." Vivian's gaze raked over Sera's simple traveling dress with obvious disdain. "Though I fear you'll find the standards here quite elevated from what you're accustomed to." "Enough." Lysander's voice cut through the subtle warfare with the finality of an executioner's blade. "Kieran, please escort Miss Blackwood to her rooms. She's had a trying day." "Of course, Your Majesty." Kieran offered Sera his arm with courtly grace. "If you'll follow me, my lady." As they climbed the steps, Sera felt Vivian's gaze burning into her back like acid. The other candidates whispered among themselves, their voices carrying just loudly enough for her to catch fragments. "Barren, desperate, won't last a week." "Don't let them get to you," Kieran murmured as they passed through the massive front doors into a foyer that could have housed her entire family cottage. "Court politics are a blood sport here. They're testing you to see how easily you break." "And if I do break?" "Then you were never worthy of him to begin with." His gray eyes met hers with surprising warmth. "But something tells me you're made of sterner stuff than they realize." The castle's interior was even more magnificent than its exterior, vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of wolves running beneath starlit skies, tapestries depicting centuries of Nightfall victories, and chandeliers that cast dancing shadows on walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Every surface spoke of wealth, power, and history stretching back to the dawn of werewolf civilization. "It's overwhelming," Sera admitted as they climbed a grand staircase whose banister had been carved from a single piece of ebony. "The first week is always the hardest," Kieran agreed. "But you'll find your footing. The Alpha King wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't see something special in you." They reached the third floor, where Kieran led her down a corridor lined with windows that offered glimpses of the moonlit gardens below. He stopped before a door carved with intricate wolf motifs and produced an ornate key. "Your suite," he announced, pushing open the door to reveal a sitting room that was larger than her entire bedroom back home. Rich burgundy fabrics complemented dark wood furniture, while a fire crackled merrily in the hearth. Through an archway, she could see a bedroom dominated by a four-poster bed that looked like it belonged to royalty. "This is too much," she breathed. "Nonsense. You're a guest of the Alpha King. Only the finest will do." He set her small bag, pitifully inadequate in these surroundings, on a velvet chair. "Dinner is served in the formal dining room at 8. I'll send a maid to help you dress." "Kieran?" She caught his arm as he turned to go. "How long has it been since Lysander chose a mate?" Something flickered in his gray eyes, surprise, perhaps even sadness. "He's never chosen one, my lady. In 300 years, he's never found anyone he deemed worthy of the Nightfall name." 300 years. The number echoed in her mind long after Kieran had left, closing the door behind him with a soft click. 3 centuries of solitude, of candidates who'd failed to capture his interest. What made her think she'd be different? She wandered through her sumptuous prison, touching silk curtains and running her fingers over furniture that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But beneath the luxury, that strange sense of familiarity persisted. When she opened the armoire, she wasn't surprised to find it stocked with gowns in her exact size and coloring. When she discovered the bathroom with its marble tub and golden fixtures, she somehow knew exactly where the towels would be stored. It was as if she'd lived here before. The maid arrived promptly at 7:30, a cheerful girl named Rose who chattered about court gossip while she helped Sera into a midnight blue gown that transformed her from a disgraced pack member into something approaching elegance. The dress hugged her curves in all the right places while the color brought out the blue in her eyes and made her dark hair shine like polished onyx. "You look beautiful, my lady," Rose declared, adding a final pin to Sera's upswept hair. "The Alpha King won't be able to take his eyes off you." If only it were that simple. The formal dining room was a testament to excess, a table that could seat 50, walls lined with more ancestral portraits, and a ceiling painted with constellations that seemed to move in the candlelight. The other Luna candidates were already seated, resplendent in jewel-toned gowns that made them look like exotic flowers. At the head of the table sat Lysander, magnificent in black formal wear that made his golden eyes burn like twin suns. He rose as she entered, and the simple courtesy made her heart flutter traitorously in her chest. "Seraphina," he murmured, his voice a silk caress. "You look radiant." "Thank you," she managed, hyper-aware of every eye in the room tracking her movement as a servant pulled out her chair, directly at Lysander's right hand, she realized with a start. The seat of honor, traditionally reserved for the favored candidate. The message wasn't lost on Vivian, whose perfect composure cracked just enough to reveal the fury beneath. "How lovely," she said, her voice crystalline with false sweetness. "Sera, you must tell us about Moonhaven. I confess I've never had occasion to visit such a rustic pack." "It's beautiful in its own way," Sera replied carefully. "Not everyone requires Gothic castles to feel at home." "Oh, but surely you must appreciate the refinement here," another candidate, a redhead with predatory green eyes, chimed in. "The culture, the sophistication. So different from what you're used to, I imagine." "Different, yes," Sera agreed. "But I've always believed that true worth comes from within, not from one's surroundings." "How philosophical," Vivian murmured. "And practical, I suppose, given your circumstances." The word circumstances dripped with meaning. Around the table, the other candidates exchanged knowing looks. "I'm sorry," Sera said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "What circumstances would those be?" Vivian's smile was razor-sharp. "Why, your unfortunate condition, of course. It must be so difficult, knowing you'll never be able to give the Alpha King the heirs he deserves." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Sera felt heat flood her cheeks, but before she could respond, Lysander's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's quite enough." His golden eyes had gone hard as amber ice. "Miss Blackwood's personal matters are not topics for dinner conversation." "Of course, Your Majesty," Vivian agreed with false contrition. "I simply thought, given the importance of bloodline succession." "I said enough." The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that frost formed on the water glasses. Every wolf present felt the crushing weight of his displeasure, necks automatically bearing in submission. Except for Sera, who found herself studying his profile with growing confusion. Why would he defend her if her barrenness was common knowledge? Unless... "A toast," Vivian announced suddenly, rising with her wine glass held high. The move forced everyone else to stand, including a reluctant Sera. "To new beginnings and, may the best woman win." The other candidates raised their glasses with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but Sera hesitated. Something felt wrong. The wine in her glass caught the candlelight strangely, and there was a faint bitter scent beneath the grape's natural perfume. Poison. The knowledge hit her like a lightning bolt, coming from some instinct she'd never possessed before. Without thinking, she stepped backward, shaking her head. "I don't drink," she lied. "Oh, come now," Vivian insisted, her eyes glittering with malice. "Surely you can make an exception for such a special occasion." "I insist." She moved closer, and Sera caught the faintest whiff of satisfaction beneath her expensive perfume. This had been planned. Calculated. The perfect way to eliminate the new threat without bloodshed. "I said no." Sera's voice carried a power she'd never heard before, something that made the very air vibrate with authority. "Don't be ridiculous." Vivian reached out as if to force the glass to Sera's lips. That's when it happened. Power erupted from Sera like a dam bursting, raw and uncontrolled and absolutely devastating. Every piece of glassware in the room, wine glasses, water goblets, crystal decanters, exploded simultaneously, sending shards of crystal raining down like deadly snow. The candidates screamed, diving for cover as fragments embedded themselves in walls and furniture with the force of bullets. In the sudden silence that followed, Sera stood frozen in the center of destruction, her dress untouched by so much as a single shard, power still crackling around her like visible electricity. "Fascinating." The voice came from the doorway, ancient and crackling with otherworldly authority. An old woman stood there, bent with age but radiating a presence that made even Lysander straighten with attention. Her eyes were clouded with blindness, but they seemed to see everything as they fixed unerringly on Sera's face. "Oracle Morwen," Lysander said, and Sera heard something she'd never expected in his voice, respect tinged with fear. "You honor us with your presence." "I go where the fates lead me, Alpha King," the old woman replied, her voice like wind through autumn leaves. She shuffled into the room with the aid of a gnarled staff, glass crunching beneath her feet. "And they have led me here, to her." Her blind gaze never wavered from Sera's face. "You are the one who was promised," Oracle Morwen declared, her words carrying the weight of destiny itself. "The barren moon child, born to break the cycles that bind us all." Gasps echoed through the ruined dining room. Sera felt her knees threatening to buckle under the weight of the oracle's pronouncement. "But hear me well, Alpha King," the ancient woman continued, turning her attention to Lysander with frightening intensity. "To claim her will cost you everything. Your power, your immortality, your very existence as you know it. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. The threads of fate grow thin, and enemies gather in the shadows." With that cryptic warning, she turned and shuffled from the room, leaving behind only the scent of ancient magic and the sound of settling glass. Sera stood in the center of the destruction, her mind reeling. Around her, the other candidates stared with mixtures of fear and awe, while Lysander's golden eyes burned with an intensity that made her soul sing. "Clean this up," he ordered curtly, never taking his gaze from Sera's face. "All of you, retire for the evening. Miss Blackwood, a word." The candidates filed out with wounded dignity, Vivian shooting Sera a look of pure hatred as she passed. Soon, only Sera and Lysander remained in the ruined dining room. "I'm sorry," she began. "I don't know what happened." "Don't apologize for protecting yourself." He moved closer, glass crunching beneath his feet. "You sensed the poison." "Yes." The admission came out as barely more than a whisper. "But I don't understand how. I've never been able to do anything like that before." "You've never been in mortal danger before." "Not real danger." His hand cupped her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Your power is awakening, Seraphina. The question is, are you ready to embrace what you're becoming?" Before she could answer, he turned and strode from the room, leaving her alone with the shattered remains of crystal and her own shattered understanding of reality. Later, much later, when the castle had settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Sera found herself unable to sleep. The events of the evening played through her mind on an endless loop: the poison, the explosion of power, the oracle's ominous prophecy. She rose from the impossibly comfortable bed and began to pace, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet. The restlessness drove her from her room and into the castle's corridors. She told herself she was simply exploring, getting familiar with her temporary home. But her feet seemed to know where they were going, carrying her through halls and up staircases with a certainty that defied logic. She found herself in a part of the castle that felt older than the rest, where dust motes danced in shafts of moonlight and portraits gazed down from the walls with eyes that seemed to follow her passage. At the end of a narrow corridor, she discovered a door that stood slightly ajar, as if waiting for her arrival. The room beyond was circular, with windows that offered a panoramic view of the moonlit forest. But it wasn't the vista that stole her breath, it was the paintings. Dozens of portraits lined the walls, all of women with dark hair and blue eyes, all bearing faces that could have been reflections of her own. The styles changed with the centuries, Renaissance gowns giving way to Regency fashion, then Victorian elegance, but the faces remained eerily consistent. With trembling steps, she moved closer to read the nameplates beneath each portrait. Luna Seraphine Nightfall, 1523 to 1524. Luna Seraphina Nightfall, 1623 to 1624. Luna Sera Nightfall, 1723 to 1724. Each woman had lived for exactly 1 year after becoming Luna. Each bore her face, her name, her cursed destiny. The last portrait stopped her heart. It showed a woman in an 18th century gown of midnight blue, her dark hair elaborately styled, her blue eyes holding a mixture of love and profound sadness. The nameplate read, Luna Seraphina Nightfall, 1723 to 1724. Beloved maid of Lysander. Mother of Marcus. Gone but never forgotten. Mother of Marcus. She'd had a child. But the medical reports had declared Sera barren, cursed, unable to conceive. Unless you weren't supposed to find this room. Lysander's voice came from behind her, soft and filled with a pain so deep it made her heart ache in sympathy. She turned to face him, her mind reeling with implications. How many times, she whispered. How many times have you lost me? His golden eyes were ancient with sorrow. Every century for the past 300 years. You're reborn, we find each other, we fall in love. His voice broke. And then you die. Always within a year of our mating. The oracle said choosing me would cost you everything. She's said that before. He moved into the room, his gaze drawn inexorably to the portrait of his lost love. Every time, I tell myself I'll be stronger. I'll let you go, spare you the fate that seems bound to your soul. And every time, I'm too selfish to walk away. Sera stared at the painted face that was her own yet not, at the evidence of a love story that had played out across centuries with the same tragic ending. What happened to her? To them? Childbirth, he said simply. She died giving birth to our son, who lived only hours after her. The curse that binds our bloodlines ensures that our love always ends in death. But I can't have children, Sera protested. The tests showed. The tests showed what they needed to show. His smile was bitter as winter. You're not barren, Seraphina. You're protected. Your body won't allow conception until the curse is broken or... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Or until I'm strong enough to survive it, she completed, understanding flooding through her. The power you displayed tonight, that's new. Every incarnation of you has been different, stronger than the last. Perhaps this time. He didn't finish the thought, but she heard it anyway. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps this time, their love story wouldn't end in tragedy. Looking at the portraits of her past selves, at the evidence of love and loss stretching back through centuries, Sera felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a mantle. She was not just Seraphina Blackwood, the barren outcast. She was the latest chapter in an epic romance that had defied death itself, over and over again. The question was, would this chapter finally have a happy ending? If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 4. Dawn crept through the windows of the portrait room like reluctant fingers of light, finding Sera still standing before the painted faces of her past selves. She hadn't moved in hours, hadn't spoken, had barely breathed as the weight of centuries pressed down upon her shoulders. Lysander stood beside her in equally profound silence, his golden eyes reflecting a pain so deep it seemed carved into his very soul. Tell me everything, she finally whispered, her voice hoarse from the night's revelations. No more half-truths, no more protection from the ugly reality. I need to know it all. Lysander's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. Her name was Seraphina Moonshadow. She was the daughter of a minor Pax Beta, beautiful and strong and absolutely fearless. His voice grew soft with memory. We met during a territorial dispute in 1723. She stood up to me, can you imagine? A Beta's daughter telling the Alpha King he was being unreasonable. Despite everything, Sera felt her lips curve slightly. Sounds familiar. Indeed. His smile was ghost-pale with sorrow. I was smitten from that first moment. She was everything I never knew I needed, compassionate where I was cold, brave where others showed fear, loyal beyond measure. We mated within the month. He moved closer to the portrait, his fingers hovering inches from the painted face without quite touching. For one perfect year, I knew what happiness meant. She transformed the castle from a fortress into a home, brought laughter to halls that had echoed only with the sounds of war and politics. And then she became pregnant, Sera supplied when his voice failed. The pregnancy was difficult from the beginning. She grew weaker instead of stronger, as if the child was somehow draining her very life force. The court physicians were baffled. Werewolf pregnancies are typically easy, natural. But this... He shook his head. She insisted something was wrong, that the baby felt different, tainted somehow. I dismissed her concerns as nerves. The pain in his voice was so raw that Sera reached out instinctively, covering his hand with her own. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she saw his pupils dilate in response. What happened? She asked gently. She went into labor on the night of the blood moon, October 31, 1724. The midwives said it was the most difficult birth they'd ever witnessed. She screamed for 18 hours, and there was so much blood. His voice cracked. When our son was finally born, he lived for exactly 7 minutes. Long enough for her to hold him, to tell him she loved him. Then they both simply stopped breathing. Tears she hadn't realized she was crying slid down Sera's cheeks. I'm so sorry. I buried them together in the royal crypt and swore I would never love again. For nearly a century, I kept that vow. And then, in 1823, I met a young woman named Seraphine Blackthorn at a diplomatic gathering. She had your face, your eyes, your terrible habit of challenging me when I was being an ass. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. She was my previous incarnation. The first of many. Every 100 years, like clockwork, you return to me. Sometimes with minor variations, different hair color, slightly different features, but always unmistakably you. The same soul wearing a new face. His golden eyes burned into hers. And every single time, I'd been too weak to resist. How many times have we done this dance? You're my fourth incarnation. Seraphina died in childbirth in 1824. Sera succumbed to a wasting illness in 1924, again, exactly 1 year after we mated. And Seraphina. His voice went hollow. She was murdered in 2024 by enemies who discovered our bond and used it against me. 4 times. For lifetimes of love and loss, of hope crushed beneath the weight of an inexorable curse. Why? The question tore from her throat. Why does this keep happening to us? Lysander turned away from the portraits, running a hand through his dark hair. 3 centuries ago, on the night Seraphina died, a witch named Morgana Ashford appeared in the castle. She claimed we'd killed her daughter during a territorial raid, which was true. Collateral damage in a war I barely remembered fighting. Ashford. The name sent ice through Sera's veins. Like Vivian Ashford? Her descendant, though I didn't realize it until recently. His voice hardened with fury. Morgana cursed our bloodline that night. She said the Nightfall line would know the pain she felt, that we would find our perfect mate, love her desperately, and lose her within a year. Over and over, for all eternity, until the last Nightfall died alone and broken. The cruelty of it stole Sera's breath. That's why you've never chosen a mate officially. You've been protecting me. Trying to, he corrected bitterly. For the first century after Seraphina's death, I managed to stay away. Let that incarnation live her life with another man, have children, grow old naturally. But in 1923, you couldn't resist anymore. I told myself one dance wouldn't hurt. One conversation. One kiss. He laughed without humor. By the end of the evening, she was carrying my mark and I was completely lost to her again. Sera stared at the painted faces surrounding them, all the women who had loved him, all the lives cut short by an ancient hatred. The oracle mentioned a prophecy. Something about this time being different. The prophecy speaks of the 4th incarnation, you. It says you'll be born under the darkest moon, marked by power that transcends death itself. That you alone have the strength to break the curse, if you survive long enough to come into your full abilities. My infertility isn't infertility at all. It's protection. He moved closer, his gaze intense. The curse works through childbirth. Every incarnation dies bearing my child because the witch's magic corrupts the pregnancy, turning what should be life into death. Your body won't allow conception until you're strong enough to survive it. But last night, the power I displayed was just the beginning. His voice held a mixture of hope and terror. According to the prophecy, the 4th incarnation will possess the ability to heal, to give life instead of taking it. But power like that comes at a cost. Before Sera could ask what kind of cost, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Kieran appeared in the doorway, his face grim. Your Majesty, he said with unusual formality. Forgive the interruption, but we have a problem. The blood moon ceremony is tonight, and the other Luna candidates are demanding to know why Miss Blackwood is receiving special consideration. Lysander's expression darkened. What exactly are they demanding? A formal presentation before the pack. They want to see her display the traditional Luna skills, healing, protection, pack bond facilitation. They're questioning her worthiness to even be considered. Clever, Sera murmured. They know I can't do any of those things. At least, not yet. Actually, Lysander said slowly, the blood moon might be exactly what we need. If the prophecy is correct, tonight's lunar event should trigger your full awakening. The question is whether we can control what happens when it does. Kieran's eyes widened with understanding. You're going to let her participate in the ceremony. Lysander, that's incredibly dangerous. If she's not ready, then we'll find out together. Lysander's voice carried the finality of a royal decree. Send word to the pack. Tonight, all candidates will demonstrate their Luna capabilities under the blood moon. Let's see who proves worthy. The hours passed in a blur of preparation. Rose arrived with a gown unlike anything Sera had ever seen, flowing black silk that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with intricate silver embroidery that depicted wolves running beneath a full moon. When she moved, the fabric whispered like wind through autumn leaves. The traditional ceremonial dress, Rose explained as she helped Sera into the elaborate garment. Worn by every Luna candidate for 1,000 years. How many of them passed the test? Sera asked. Rose's hands stilled on the fabric. Only one, my lady. The Alpha King's first mate. As sunset approached, Sera found herself in the castle's great hall surrounded by the other candidates. Vivian, resplendent in crimson silk, held court near the massive fireplace while the others clustered around her like satellites orbiting a beautiful, deadly star. Nervous, darling? Vivian's voice carried across the room with false sweetness. I confess, I can't imagine what skills you think you possess that the rest of us lack. We'll find out soon enough, Sera replied evenly. Indeed we will. Vivian's smile was razor-sharp. Though I do hope you won't embarrass yourself too badly. The pack can be quite unforgiving of failure. Before Sera could respond, the massive doors opened and Lysander entered, flanked by his betas and the senior pack members. He wore ceremonial robes of midnight blue trimmed with silver, and a circlet rested on his brow, not quite a crown, but unmistakably regal. The sight of him took Sera's breath away. Ladies, he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. Tonight, under the blood moon, you'll each demonstrate the sacred abilities that mark a true Luna. Healing, protection, and the capacity to forge bonds that strengthen the pack. Those who succeed will continue in the selection process. Those who fail. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Outside, the moon was beginning to rise, huge and red as fresh blood, casting an eerie crimson light through the hall's tall windows. Sera felt something stir deep in her chest, like a sleeping giant beginning to wake. We'll proceed in order of arrival, Lysander announced. Lady Vivian, you'll go first. Vivian stepped forward with fluid grace, every inch the perfect Luna candidate. One of the pack members was brought forward, an elderly man with a festering wound on his arm that had resisted all conventional treatment. Heal him, Lysander commanded. Vivian placed her hands over the wound and closed her eyes in concentration. Sera watched as a soft golden light emanated from her palms, sinking into the man's injured flesh. Within moments, the infection had cleared and healthy pink skin covered what had been an open sore. The pack murmured appreciatively as Vivian moved on to the protection demonstration, creating a shimmering barrier of energy around herself, then to pack bonding, where she somehow strengthened the mental links between several pack members until they could communicate telepathically. She was perfect. Absolutely, flawlessly perfect. The other candidates performed similar feats with varying degrees of success. Some managed 2 of the 3 tests, others struggled with even 1. But all displayed abilities that Sera was certain she didn't possess. Finally, inevitably, her turn came. Seraphina Blackwood, Lysander called, his voice betraying nothing of their intimate connection. She stepped forward on trembling legs, acutely aware of every eye in the room tracking her movement. Above them, the blood moon had reached its zenith, bathing the hall in light the color of spilled wine. The same elderly man was brought forward, though now he bore a different injury, burn marks across his chest that spoke of recent pain. Heal him, Lysander commanded, exactly as he had with the others. Sera stared at the wounded man, then at her own hands. She had no training, no technique, no idea what she was supposed to do. Around the hall, she could hear whispers beginning, doubts, mockings, barely contained laughter at her obvious inadequacy. But then the blood moon's light touched her skin, and everything changed. Power erupted through her like a dam bursting, raw and wild and absolutely overwhelming. She gasped as energy poured into her from some cosmic source she couldn't name, filling every cell in her body until she thought she might explode from the pressure. Without conscious thought, she placed her hands on the man's burned chest. Light, not golden like Vivian's, but pure silver that seemed to contain all the colors of the aurora, flowed from her palms into his wounds. But this wasn't just healing. This was resurrection, transformation, the very essence of life itself being channeled through her mortal form. The man's burns didn't just heal, they disappeared as if they'd never existed. His gray hair darkened to brown, lines smoothed from his face, and his stooped posture straightened as decades of accumulated damage was simply undone. Gasps echoed through the hall, but Sera barely heard them. The power was still pouring through her, demanding more, needing to heal, to give life, to fix everything that was broken in the world around her. She moved to the next person, then the next, her hands leaving trails of silver light as she healed injuries both recent and ancient. Scars faded, illnesses fled, even old emotional wounds seemed to close under her touch. But with each healing, she grew weaker. Each person she saved cost her something essential, some piece of her own life force flowing out of her and into them. Sera, stop. Lysander's voice came from very far away. You're killing yourself. She tried to listen, tried to pull back, but the power had its own will now. Through the hall's windows, she could see shapes moving in the shadows beyond, dark figures that shouldn't exist creeping toward the castle with malevolent intent. Attack, she managed to gasp. They're coming. The words had barely left her lips when the windows exploded inward, showering the hall with glittering shards of glass. Dark-robed figures poured through the openings, their faces hidden behind masks carved with ancient symbols of death and despair. They moved with inhuman speed and coordination, striking at the pack members with weapons that gleamed with unnatural light. Protect the Alpha King. Kieran roared, but even as the loyal betas moved to form a defensive circle, Sera could see they were outnumbered and outmatched. The silver power within her responded to the threat without conscious direction. Light exploded from her small form, creating a barrier of pure energy that held the attackers at bay. But each second she maintained the protection cost her more of her rapidly diminishing strength. Around the hall, pack members fell to mystical weapons that cut through both flesh and spirit. She could feel their pain, their terror, their lives flickering like candles in a hurricane. Save them. The thought consumed her completely. Save them all. She opened herself fully to the cosmic force flowing through her, letting it pour out in waves of healing energy that touched every wounded person in the hall. Bodies mended, spirits renewed, even the dying found strength to fight on. But the cost. Sera felt her knees buckle as her own life force drained away like water through a broken dam. Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, and she realized with detached certainty that she was dying, not from the curse this time, but from the very power that was supposed to save her. Through the growing haze, she saw Lysander fighting with supernatural fury, his claws and fangs tearing through their enemies with ruthless efficiency. She saw Vivian cowering behind an overturned table, her perfect composure finally cracked. She saw Kieran rally the remaining guards for one final desperate stand. And then she saw nothing at all as consciousness fled, taking the silver light with it. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her was a familiar voice, cold with satisfaction and terrible purpose. Excellent. The bait has been taken. Signal the others, the final phase begins now. When Sera's eyes fluttered open hours later, she found herself in her own bed, surrounded by the soft glow of healing crystals and the worried faces of those who'd survived the attack. Her body felt hollow, wrung out like a cloth squeezed dry. Thank the gods, Kieran breathed, his relief palpable. We thought we'd lost you. The attackers, she managed to whisper. Gone. They retreated when you collapsed and the barrier fell. Lysander appeared at her bedside, his golden eyes dark with worry and something that might have been pride. You saved us all, Seraphina. Every single person in that hall owes their life to you. But at what cost? She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the world spun around her. I can barely lift my head. Power like yours requires practice, control. You'll learn to regulate the flow, to heal without destroying yourself in the process. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding hers with desperate gentleness. The important thing is that you survived. The prophecy spoke truly, you are different from the others. Stronger. Who were they? The attackers? We're still investigating, Kieran replied, though something in his expression suggested he had suspicions he wasn't sharing. But their weapons bore the mark of the old magic. This wasn't a random assault, it was planned, coordinated. Before anyone could respond to this ominous observation, voices drifted through the partially open door. Sera recognized Vivian's cultured tones, though they carried an edge she'd never heard before. Told you the timing was perfect. She exhausted herself completely, just as we predicted. And the Alpha King? The second voice was unfamiliar, rough with some unidentifiable accent. Completely devoted to his precious barren mate. He'll never see the final blow coming. Vivian's laugh was like broken crystal. 300 years of planning, and it all comes down to this. Soon, both the Alpha King and his reincarnated whore will be dead, and the Nightfall line will end forever. Morgana's curse will be complete. The voices moved away, leaving behind a silence so profound that Sera could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Lysander's face had gone white with shock and dawning fury. Vivian, he breathed. She's been working with them all along. Not just working with them, Sera whispered, the terrible pieces clicking into place. Leading them. She's Morgana Ashford's descendant, sent here to finish what her ancestor started. The other candidates, Kieran said suddenly. If she's been planning this for months, possibly years. They're all in on it, Lysander finished, his voice deadly calm. Every single one of them. They weren't candidates at all, they were an assassination team. Through the window, the blood moon was beginning to set, its crimson light fading to the pale silver of approaching dawn. But for Sera, staring at the faces of the two men she'd grown to trust, it felt like the darkness was just beginning. Somewhere in the castle, enemies wearing the faces of friends were preparing to destroy everything she'd come to care about. And she, the prophesied savior who was supposed to break the curse, was lying helpless in bed with barely enough strength to lift her head. The final phase had indeed begun. And this time, she wasn't sure they would survive it. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 5. The morning light filtering through the heavy curtains found Sera sitting rigidly in the chair beside her bed, her blue eyes blazing with a fury that could have melted steel. 3 days had passed since the blood moon attack, 3 days of recovery and revelation, and she was done being treated like a fragile porcelain doll who couldn't handle the truth. No more secrets, she declared when Lysander entered with her morning tea, his golden eyes immediately assessing her improved color and stronger posture. No more half-truths, no more protective omissions. If we're going to face whatever Vivian has planned, I need to know everything. Lysander set the tea service down with careful precision, his movements betraying the tension coiled in his powerful frame. Seraphina. Don't Seraphina me in that patronizing tone. She rose from the chair with only the slightest tremor in her legs, her newfound power having accelerated her healing beyond normal werewolf capabilities. For 300 years, you've been making decisions about my life, about all my lives, without giving me a choice. That ends now. Something flickered in his golden depths, surprise, perhaps even approval. You're angry. I'm furious. She moved closer, close enough to catch his intoxicating scent of pine and leather and something indefinably male. You knew Vivian was dangerous. You suspected the other candidates were compromised. Yet you let me walk into that ceremony completely unprepared. I was trying to protect you. By lying to me. The words exploded from her with enough force to rattle the windows. By letting me believe I was some barren outcast competing for your affections when the truth is we're bound by cosmic forces I don't even understand. Lysander's carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing the raw emotion beneath. Because I was terrified. The admission tore from his throat like a battle cry. Because every time I've told one of your incarnations the truth, she's died within months. Because I couldn't bear to watch you look at me with pity instead of love, knowing you were only here because some ancient prophecy says we're destined to destroy each other. The silence that followed was deafening. They stood inches apart, both breathing hard, the air between them crackling with unresolved tension and centuries of accumulated longing. You think I'd pity you? Sera's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more power than her earlier shouts. You think knowing the truth would diminish what I feel? What do you feel? The question was barely audible, as if he was afraid to hear the answer. Instead of responding with words, Sera closed the distance between them, her hands fisting in the silk of his shirt as she pulled his mouth down to hers. The kiss was electric, desperate, 300 years of separation and loss condensed into a single moment of perfect connection. Lysander's control shattered completely. His arms came around her like steel bands, lifting her against him as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that bordered on violence. She could taste his desperation, his fear, his overwhelming love, emotions so intense they threatened to consume them both. Seraphina, he groaned against her lips, her name a prayer and a curse wrapped in velvet darkness. I love you, she whispered, the words settling between them like a benediction. Not because of some prophecy or ancient curse. Not because I'm the reincarnation of someone you lost. I love you because you're brave enough to care despite the cost. Because you've endured centuries of loss and still have room in your heart for hope. Something broke open in his chest at her words, some wall he'd built to protect himself from the inevitable pain of loving her again. You'll die, he said brokenly. They all die. The curse ensures it. Then we'll break the curse. She cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs tracing the sharp angles of his cheekbones. Together. But no more lies between us, Lysander. No more secrets. Whatever happens, we face it as equals. He stared down at her for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. Then, with a sound that was half growl, half surrender, he swept her into his arms and carried her to the bed. What followed was a claiming as old as time itself, fierce and tender, desperate and reverent. They came together with the fury of a storm and the gentleness of dawn, two souls recognizing their perfect match despite the centuries that had tried to tear them apart. When Lysander's teeth found the curve of her neck, marking her as his mate, Sera felt something fundamental shift in the universe. Power flowed between them, ancient and primal, forging a connection that transcended the physical realm. But even as the mating bond began to form, she could sense something was wrong, incomplete, tainted by the curse that hung over them like a blade. It's not working, she gasped, her body arching beneath his as waves of frustrated magic crashed through her. The curse, Lysander managed, his voice strained with effort and disappointment. It won't allow the bond to complete until the cycle is broken. They clung to each other in the aftermath, their bodies entwined but their souls held apart by malevolent forces beyond their control. The incomplete bond left them both aching, as if some essential piece of themselves remained just out of reach. We'll find a way, Sera whispered against his chest, her fingers tracing the scars that marked his warrior's body. The prophecy said this incarnation would be different. I have to believe that means something. Over the following days, Sera threw herself into learning to control her newfound abilities with an intensity that worried both Lysander and Kieran. She could heal minor injuries now without collapsing, though each use of her power still drained her significantly. More troubling was the growing realization that her gift came with a terrible cost. Each person she healed took something irreplaceable from her own life force. You're killing yourself slowly, Kieran observed during one of their training sessions in the castle's courtyard. He'd been helping her practice, allowing himself to be injured so she could work on controlling the flow of her healing energy. Better slowly than all at once, she replied, kneeling beside him to heal the practice wound on his arm. Silver light flowed from her palms, but this time she managed to stop the flow before it could drain her completely. Is it, though? Kieran's gray eyes were serious as he watched the cut close seamlessly. Sera, you've aged a year in the past week. Your hair is losing its shine, there are shadows under your eyes that weren't there before. If this continues, I'll figure out how to balance it. She sat back on her heels, breathing hard from the effort. I have to. Too many people are depending on me. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. There's something I need to tell you, he said finally. Something I probably should have said days ago. What? I'm in love with you. The words fell between them like stones dropped in still water. Have been since the moment you stepped out of that carriage and looked at this place like you were coming home. I know you're mated to Lysander, know you love him, and I would never do anything to interfere with that bond. But I needed you to know, in case we don't all survive what's coming. Sera stared at him, her heart breaking for the pain she could see in his honest gray eyes. Kieran. You don't have to say anything, he interrupted gently. I just wanted you to know that you're loved. Completely, utterly loved, by more than one person in this castle. If the worst happens, if the prophecy fails and the curse claims you, I want you to go knowing that your life mattered to someone beyond just fulfilling some cosmic destiny. Before she could respond, the air around them suddenly thickened with malevolent energy. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds, and shadows began moving independently of their sources. Dark magic, Kieran breathed, leaping to his feet and pulling Sera with him. We need to get you inside, now. But it was too late. Vivian's voice rang out across the courtyard, amplified by supernatural power until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Loyal wolves of the royal pack, she called, her cultured tones now underscored with an authority that made the very stones tremble. Your Alpha King has been deceiving you. The woman he claims as his mate is cursed, a harbinger of death and destruction who will bring ruin to everything we hold dear. Around the courtyard, pack members began emerging from the castle and surrounding buildings, their expressions confused and increasingly hostile as Vivian's magic worked on their minds. She lies. Kieran shouted, but his voice was lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. Does she? Vivian appeared at the courtyard's entrance, no longer bothering to hide her true nature. Power rolled off her in waves, not the golden healing energy of a Luna, but something darker, older, tainted with centuries of accumulated malice. Look at her, my friends. See how she drains the life from everything she touches. Your beta Kieran grows weaker each day from her healing practices. Soon, she'll consume us all. Half the pack had gathered now, and Sera could see the magic working on them, turning natural pack loyalty into suspicion and fear. Even wolves who'd smiled at her days before now looked at her with barely concealed hostility. This ends now, Vivian. Lysander's voice cut through the chaos as he appeared at Sera's side, his presence immediately shifting the supernatural atmosphere. Power met power, ancient authority clashing with usurped magic. Does it, my king? Vivian's smile was radiant and terrible. I think you'll find my influence runs deeper than you know. She raised her hands, and dark energy exploded from her palms like black lightning. Half the assembled pack, including several of Lysander's most trusted betas, suddenly turned on their packmates, their eyes now glowing with unnatural light. Mind control, Lysander snarled, his own power rising to meet the threat. You're violating the most sacred laws of our kind. Laws written by your bloodline to maintain your stranglehold on power. Vivian's true voice was nothing like the cultured tones she'd used before. This was rougher, older, carrying the weight of ancient grudges. Tonight, the Nightfall reign ends forever. The battle erupted with savage fury. Controlled pack members attacked their friends and family with mindless determination while those still free tried to defend themselves without seriously harming their loved ones. In the center of the chaos, Lysander and Sera fought back-to-back against waves of attackers, their incomplete bonds still allowing them to move with uncanny coordination. Can you break her hold on them? Lysander called out as he threw off 3 attackers at once. I can try. Sera reached out with her power, seeking the dark threads that bound the controlled wolves to Vivian's will. But the magic was old and strong, reinforced by centuries of planning and preparation. That's when the main gates burst open, admitting a sight that drove the breath from Sera's lungs. Her parents marched into the courtyard flanked by a dozen Shadowmere warriors, their faces set with grim determination. Enough. Richard Blackwood's voice boomed across the battlefield. By order of the Werewolf Council, I demand you release our daughter from your unlawful captivity, Alpha King. The fighting slowed as both sides turned to stare at this unexpected development. Sera felt her world tilt sideways as the implications hit her. Captivity, she managed to gasp. What are you talking about? You were sold to Shadowmere Pack legally and honorably, Helena declared, her voice carrying across the courtyard. This creature kidnapped you before the transaction could be completed. We've come to take you home. We are home, Lysander snarled, moving protectively in front of Sera. She chose to come with me. Under duress and magical compulsion, Richard shot back. A mating performed without pack consent is invalid under ancient law. Through the crowd, Sera caught sight of a familiar face, Damien, her brother, hanging back behind their parents with an expression of torment she'd never seen before. This was planned, she whispered, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The sale to Shadowmere, Vivian's presence here, everything. You've been working with her all along. We've been protecting the werewolf world from you, Helena replied coldly. The oracle's prophecy was clear, you would bring destruction to everything you touched. We tried to spare you this fate, but you wouldn't listen to reason. Sera, no. Damien suddenly broke from the group, desperation written across his features. Don't listen to them. They've been lying to you your whole life. Damien, stop. Richard barked, but his son ignored him. The infertility. Damien shouted, reaching toward her even as Shadowmere warriors moved to restrain him. It wasn't natural. They've been poisoning you since childhood, wolfsbane in your food, moonsbane in your water. They made you barren to strengthen the curse. The revelation hit Sera like a physical blow. Everything she believed about herself, every moment of shame and inadequacy, had been deliberately engineered by the people who were supposed to love her most. You monsters, she breathed, power beginning to build around her like a visible aura. You poisoned your own daughter. We saved the world from you, Helena replied without a trace of remorse. And we'll do it again. The battle resumed with even greater intensity, but now Sera fought with the fury of betrayal fueling her power. Silver light erupted from her in waves, healing her allies and disrupting Vivian's mind control simultaneously. For a moment, it seemed they might actually win. Then everything went wrong. A Shadowmere blade, coated with some substance that made it glow with unnatural light, sliced through the melee toward Lysander's back. Without thinking, Sera threw herself between them, the poisoned steel driving deep into her chest just below her heart. Agony beyond description ripped through her as whatever coated the blade began spreading through her system like liquid fire. She felt Lysander catch her as she fell, felt his anguish through their incomplete bond as her life began ebbing away. No, he whispered, his voice breaking. Not again. Not this time. The bond, she gasped, her vision already beginning to gray at the edges. It's pulling you down with me. And it was. She could feel their incomplete mating connection acting like a chain, her approaching death dragging him toward the same darkness. His golden eyes were already beginning to dim, his supernatural strength failing as her heart struggled to keep beating. I love you, she managed to say, her blood seeping into the ancient stones of the courtyard. All of me. Every incarnation, every life, every death. I love you. But as her blood touched the earth, something extraordinary happened. The ground beneath them began to glow with the same silver light that emanated from her healing power, but stronger, older, primordial. Ancient symbols carved into the very foundations of the castle began to pulse with awakening energy. Impossible, Vivian breathed, her face going pale with sudden fear. Through her fading consciousness, Sera heard a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself, ancient, feminine, and absolutely furious. Enough, the voice said, and the very air around them began to shimmer with divine power. 300 years of interference with my children ends now. The last thing Sera saw before darkness claimed her was a figure of impossible beauty rising from the blood-soaked earth, tall, radiant, with eyes like stars and hair like spun moonlight. The moon goddess herself had finally come to collect her daughter. And she did not look pleased with what she found. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 6. Between life and death lay a realm that existed beyond mortal comprehension, a place where time flowed like honey and space folded in on itself like origami made of starlight. Sera found herself standing in this impossible landscape, her mortal wounds healed but her body feeling strangely insubstantial, as if she were made of moonbeams and memory. The being who approached her moved with the fluid grace of liquid silver, her form shifting between solid flesh and pure luminescence. She was tall and regal, with hair that cascaded like spilled starlight and eyes that held the depth of eternity itself. When she smiled, it was with the warmth of a mother who had waited eons to embrace a beloved child. "My precious daughter," the moon goddess said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Sera's soul sing in recognition. "At last, you have come home to me." "I don't understand." Sera's voice echoed strangely in this place between worlds. "You're the moon goddess, but I'm nobody. A barren outcast who couldn't even shift properly. You are Seraphina, my daughter, born of divine essence and mortal experience." The goddess moved closer, her presence filling Sera with a sense of belonging she'd never known existed. "Did you think it mere chance that your power manifested as healing light? That you alone could channel the silver fire of creation itself?" The truth hit Sera like a physical blow. The reincarnations were not reincarnations at all, but fragments of your divine soul experiencing mortal life. The goddess's expression grew sorrowful. Each incarnation was meant to teach you essential lessons: love, sacrifice, courage, compassion. But the curse interfered, cutting short each life before the teachings could take root. Around them, the ethereal landscape shifted to show visions of the mortal world below. Through windows of light, Sera could see Lysander collapsed on the courtyard stones, his life ebbing away as their shattered bond drained him. Kieran stood over him, desperately trying to rally the remaining loyal pack members while Vivian raised her hands in some dark ritual that made the very air writhe with malevolent energy. "He's dying because of me," Sera whispered, her divine heart breaking at the sight. "He is dying because of the curse that has plagued your love for 3 centuries, the goddess corrected gently. A witch's spite that grew beyond its original bounds, fed by hatred until it became almost sentient. Morgana Ashford's curse. A grieving mother's revenge that interfered with cosmic design itself." Divine anger flickered in the goddess's starlight eyes. She sought to punish one bloodline and ended up disrupting the very fabric of supernatural fate. Sera watched through the vision as Vivian's magic coiled around the remaining pack members, her power growing stronger by the moment. Whatever ritual she was performing would soon reach a point of no return. "I have to go back," Sera said desperately. "They need me." "Yes, they do. And so you must choose, my daughter." The goddess's voice grew infinitely gentle. "Ascend now to your full divine nature and gain the power to save them all, but lose forever your chance at mortal love. Or return to flesh one final time, with access to your true abilities but still bound by the curse that demands sacrifice." The choice hung between them like a sword suspended by spider's silk. Sera thought of Lysander's golden eyes, the way they'd blazed with love when she'd confessed her feelings. She thought of Kieran's quiet devotion, of the innocent pack members caught in this supernatural war they'd never asked to join. What would ascending mean? You would become what you were born to be, a goddess of healing and protection, guardian of all supernatural beings. Your power would be unlimited, your wisdom vast. You could end not just this curse, but all the conflicts that plague the balance between our world and theirs. The goddess paused meaningfully. "But goddesses cannot mate with mortals, child. The power differential would destroy any mortal who attempted such a bond. You would save Lysander's life but lose him forever. And if I return?" "You return with full access to your divine heritage while remaining bound in mortal flesh. The curse would still require its price, a willing sacrifice of true love to break the cycle. Either you must die to free Lysander from the bloodline curse, or he must die to allow you to ascend and protect all werewolves from future supernatural threats." The cosmic cruelty of it stole Sera's breath. After centuries of searching for each other, they would face a choice that meant eternal separation regardless of what they decided. "There's no third option." "If there were, beloved daughter, do you not think I would have found it in 300 years of watching you suffer?" The sadness in the goddess's voice was infinite. "Some cosmic equations can only be balanced through ultimate sacrifice. Through the shifting visions, Sera saw Vivian's dark magic reaching critical mass, shadows spreading across the courtyard like living things. Whatever she was doing would be irreversible within moments. "I choose to return," Sera declared, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her divine heart. "I choose to face the curse one final time. If this is about love and free will, then let the choice be ours to make." The moon goddess's smile blazed with pride and heartbreak in equal measure. "I hoped you would choose thus. You have learned the most important lesson, that the greatest gift I can give my children is the freedom to choose their own fate, even when it breaks their mother's heart." She reached out with fingers made of concentrated moonlight, touching Sera's face with infinite tenderness. Power flowed between them, not the raw, chaotic energy Sera had struggled with before, but something refined, controlled, deadly in its precision and beautiful in its purpose. "You return with your divine nature unlocked but contained within mortal flesh. Use this gift wisely, daughter. The curse ensures I cannot intervene directly again until it is resolved one way or another." The ethereal realm began dissolving around them, reality reasserting itself with brutal urgency. As Sera felt herself being pulled back toward the world of flesh and consequence, she heard her mother's voice one last time. "Remember, precious child, true love is not possession but liberation. Sometimes we must lose everything to save what matters most." Then she was falling through starlight and shadow, through the spaces between heartbeats, back toward a world tearing itself apart at the seams. Death came for Lysander like an old friend he'd been expecting for centuries. He felt Sera die through their incomplete bond, a severing so absolute it drove him to his knees on the blood-soaked stones. The agony was beyond physical pain, beyond emotional trauma. It was the dissolution of his very soul, the snuffing out of the only light that had made his endless existence bearable. "Not again," he whispered, gathering her cooling body against his chest as chaos raged around them. "Please, not again." But her heart had stopped, her breathing stilled, and the silver radiance that had made her unique flickered and died. Through the haze of his own approaching death, he was dimly aware of Kieran's shouting orders, of pack members fighting desperately against impossible odds, of Vivian's triumphant laughter echoing across the courtyard. "Your Majesty." Kieran's voice cut through the fog of despair. "She's beginning the final ritual." Lysander lifted his gaze to see Vivian standing in the center of devastation, her arms raised toward the blood moon overhead. Dark magic poured from her in torrents, and where it touched the ancient stones, they began to crack and bleed actual blood. "Powers of the first darkness," she chanted, her voice carrying an authority that made the very air recoil in horror, "grant me the strength to complete what was begun. Let the nightfall line end in fire and shadow." The temperature plummeted so suddenly that frost formed on the bloody stones. The controlled pack members collapsed as Vivian's magic used them as conduits for something far more terrible than mere mind control. She was channeling the original curse itself, drawing power from the accumulated hatred of 3 centuries. "She means to steal your bloodline's power," Kieran gasped, supporting a wounded ally while trying to maintain some semblance of a defensive perimeter. "If she succeeds, she'll become the new supernatural authority in this region." "Let her," Lysander said hollowly, his life force continuing to ebb as the broken bond dragged him toward the same darkness that had claimed his mate. "What does it matter now?" "It matters because Sera died trying to save us all." Kieran's voice cracked with desperation and grief. "Don't let her sacrifice be meaningless." Before Lysander could respond, light began building among the clouds overhead, not the harsh glare of lightning, but something infinitely more beautiful and terrible. Silver radiance poured down like liquid starlight, and within its brilliance, a figure began to descend that made every supernatural being present fall to their knees in instinctive worship. Sera floated down from the heavens clothed in divine light, her dark hair flowing around her like a living shadow kissed by moonbeams. Her simple training clothes had been replaced by robes that seemed woven from the aurora itself, and when her bare feet touched the blood-stained courtyard, flowers of impossible beauty bloomed in her footsteps. She was transformed, still recognizably herself, but elevated beyond merely mortal concerns. Power radiated from her in waves that spoke of cosmic authority, yet she remained flesh and blood, breathing and beating heart contained within mortal form. "Impossible," Vivian breathed, her ritual faltering as she stared at the figure who should have been growing cold on the stones. "Many things are impossible," Sera replied, her voice now carrying harmonics that made the air itself sing, "until someone makes them happen." She moved toward Lysander with fluid grace, and he felt their bond snap back into existence, not incomplete this time, but blazing with a connection that transcended physical reality. Through it, he could sense her divine nature, her terrible power, and beneath it all, the mortal love that had brought her back to him. "My beloved," she whispered, kneeling beside him and placing glowing hands on his chest. Life flowed back into him like spring returning after endless winter, healing not just his body but the wounds the shattered bond had torn in his very soul. "I chose to come back to you. You chose mortality over divinity." "I chose us," she corrected, helping him to his feet with hands that sparkled with contained starlight. "I chose the chance to face this curse together, whatever the cost might be." Around them, the battle had completely stopped as both sides stared at this impossible resurrection. Even the Shadowmere warriors looked uncertain, their weapons lowering as they faced something beyond their comprehension or training. "It changes nothing," Vivian snarled, raising her hands to resume her interrupted ritual. "You're still bound by flesh, still subject to the curse that has doomed your line for centuries. When I steal the Nightfall power, I'll ensure your death is permanent this time." "About that curse," Sera said conversationally, silver light beginning to build around her like visible music. "I had an interesting conversation with my mother while I was dead. Would you like to know what she told me?" "Your mother died giving birth to you." Vivian shot back. "Another victim of the curse that ensures all who love a Nightfall will perish." "My mother," Sera replied with a smile that could have illuminated the darkest abyss, "is the moon goddess herself. And she's quite displeased with what you've been doing to her daughter." The revelation crashed over the courtyard like a tidal wave. Gasps echoed from supernatural beings on both sides as the implications became clear. This wasn't merely a conflict between packs, but divine intervention in mortal affairs. Vivian's face went beyond pale into something approaching absolute terror as she realized the true scope of the cosmic forces she'd been interfering with. "The curse can only be broken through willing sacrifice," Sera continued, moving to stand beside Lysander with their restored bond humming between them like a living symphony. "One of us must choose death to free the other. But here's something fascinating about curses, Vivian: they bind the caster as thoroughly as the victim." "What do you mean?" The question was barely audible. "Your family has been enslaved to this hatred for 3 centuries, each generation more twisted than the last. You're not here because you chose to be, you're here because the curse your ancestor cast has consumed your bloodline completely. You're as much a prisoner as we are." Sera's power flared brighter, revealing truths that had been hidden for generations. "I could free you, too. The curse, the hatred, the endless cycle of revenge, all of it could end tonight." For one shining moment, hope flickered in Vivian's ice-blue eyes. Then it died, snuffed out by centuries of accumulated malice. "I don't want freedom," she hissed, dark power coiling around her like serpents made of shadow. "I want the Nightfall line extinct, and I want to be the instrument of its destruction." The magic she'd been gathering exploded outward, but not toward Sera and Lysander. Instead, it poured into the very foundations of the castle, shattering ancient protective wards and revealing symbols carved into the bedrock below, not the benevolent runes of the Nightfall family, but something far older and infinitely more sinister. "If I cannot steal your power," Vivian declared as her form began to shift and change, "then I invoke my ancestors' final contingency." Morgana bound her own soul to this place centuries ago, waiting for a descendant strong enough to serve as her vessel. Horror spread through the assembled werewolves as Vivian's beautiful features melted and reformed. Her platinum hair darkened to midnight black, her perfect figure warping into something altogether more terrible and ancient. The witch who had originally cursed the Nightfall line was using her descendant's body to return to the mortal realm. "The final confrontation begins now," Morgana Ashford declared with Vivian's transformed voice, her eyes glowing with malice accumulated across centuries. "Not between bloodlines or packs, but between the divine and the damned. Let us discover which proves stronger, a goddess's love or a witch's eternal hatred." Power erupted from her in waves so dark they seemed to devour moonlight itself. Around her, the sinister symbols carved into the castle's foundations began spreading across the stones like a malevolent infection, corrupting everything they touched. Sera and Lysander stood together at the center of the growing maelstrom, their bond blazing like a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The choice between sacrifice and salvation was about to be forced upon them, and this time, the very balance of the supernatural world hung in the consequences of their decision. The curse had evolved into something beyond its original design, and its final form would test not just their love, but the very nature of their souls. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 7. The creature that had once been Vivian Ashford stood wreathed in shadows so dark they seemed to devour reality itself. Morgana's ancient soul burned behind those ice-blue eyes now, 3 centuries of accumulated hatred given form and terrible purpose. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of countless curses and the bitter taste of a mother's endless grief. So, the little goddess returns to play with mortals, Morgana purred, her form shifting between Vivian's beauty and something far more ancient and terrible. How fitting that you should witness the completion of my life's work. Power erupted from her in waves that cracked the very stones of the castle, dark magic so potent it made the air itself recoil in horror. Where her energy touched the ancient protective runes carved into the walls, they withered and died, leaving behind symbols that hurt to look at directly. Your work was built on grief and spite, Sera replied, silver light beginning to coalesce around her as her divine nature responded to the threat. It ends tonight. Does it? Morgana's laughter could have shattered glass. Look around you, child. See what your precious love has wrought. As if her words were a signal, the battle erupted across multiple planes of existence simultaneously. The physical realm shook as supernatural forces clashed, but Sera could sense the conflict spreading beyond the merely mortal, through the spirit realm, across the astral plane, affecting werewolf packs on distant continents as the cosmic balance tilted toward chaos. Lysander moved to stand beside her, his own power blazing like molten gold as he prepared to face the enemy that had tormented his bloodline for 3 centuries. Their incomplete bond hummed between them, stronger than before but still lacking the perfect unity that would make them truly unstoppable. Together, he said simply, and Sera felt her divine heart swell with love so profound it threatened to overwhelm her mortal vessel. They moved as one, silver and gold light intertwining as they launched their first coordinated attack. Sera's healing power, twisted into something more aggressive, sought to purify the darkness consuming Morgana while Lysander's alpha authority attempted to bind her in place. But the ancient witch was ready for them. Dark magic met divine light in an explosion that shattered every remaining window in the castle, and when the debris settled, Morgana stood unharmed in the center of a crater that had once been the courtyard's ancient stones. 300 years I have prepared for this moment, she declared, raising her hands as tendrils of shadow erupted from the ground around them. Every death that fed the curse, every broken heart, every moment of despair, all of it has made me stronger. The shadows struck like living serpents, wrapping around Sera and Lysander with crushing force. But their bond flared in response, burning away the dark magic before it could fully take hold. They fought back to back now, silver and gold energies creating a protective barrier that held Morgana's assault at bay. The bond, Lysander called out as another wave of darkness crashed against their defenses. It's not complete. We're fighting at half strength. I know, Sera gasped, pouring more of her divine essence into their shield as Morgana's power pressed against them like the weight of centuries. But completing it could kill us both, or save us both. His golden eyes met hers across the chaos. Either way, we face it together. Around them, the surviving pack members fought desperately against shadow creatures that materialized from Morgana's malice. Kieran led a group of loyal betas in a charge against the controlled Shadowmere warriors, his sword blazing with borrowed light from Sera's power. But for every enemy that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. Then, through the maelstrom of battle, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Sera. She turned to see Damien racing across the broken ground, his face a mask of determination and desperate love. Behind him came more Moonhaven wolves, not to support their alpha's alliance with Vivian, but to stand with the sister they had wronged. Damien, no, she cried as she saw him heading directly toward a cluster of shadow creatures that would tear him apart. Get back. I failed you once, he called back, his sword already singing through the air as he cut down the first attacker. I won't fail you again. What followed was the most beautiful and terrible thing Sera had ever witnessed. Her brother, who had once called her a stain on the family honor, fought like a man possessed, carving a path through enemies that should have been beyond his ability to face. His blade found shadow hearts with impossible precision, his movements flowing like deadly poetry. But there were too many of them. Sera watched in horror as claws of living darkness found gaps in his defense, watched as her brother's blood painted the stones red, watched as he fell to his knees but kept fighting, kept protecting the sister he'd finally learned to love. Damien. The scream tore from her throat as she broke from her defensive position, silver light erupting from her in waves as she tried to reach him. Stay back, he gasped, his sword wavering as more shadow creatures closed in. This is my choice. My redemption. The killing blow came from behind, a spear of pure darkness that punched through his chest and out the front, leaving him suspended like a grotesque scarecrow. But even as he died, Damien's eyes found Sera's across the battlefield, and his smile was radiant with peace. I'm proud of you, little sister, he whispered, his voice somehow carrying over the sounds of battle. I'm proud to be your brother. Then he was gone, his body crumbling to ash that the wind scattered like prayers across the blood-soaked stones. No. Sera's grief exploded outward in a wave of pure divine wrath that incinerated every shadow creature within 100 yards. But even as her power lashed out in fury, she could feel Morgana drawing strength from the death, the witch's laughter echoing across the multiple planes where their battle raged. Yes, the ancient enemy hissed, her form growing more solid, more terrible with each life lost. Feed the curse with your pain. Every death makes me stronger, every tear shed in grief becomes another weapon in my arsenal. She's right, Lysander said grimly, his own power flickering as exhaustion began to take its toll. The more we fight like this, the more we play into her hands. She's been feeding on supernatural death for centuries, every wolf who died because of the curse, every heart broken by its influence. Then what do we do? Sera asked, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the spot where her brother had made his final stand. We complete the bond, he said simply. Whatever the cost, we face it as true mates. She stared at him, seeing in his golden eyes the same desperate love she felt in her own divine heart. The completed mating bond might save them, giving them the unified power to break the curse and defeat Morgana. Or it might kill them both, their combined life forces burning too bright to be contained in mortal flesh. If we die, then we die together, he finished. And maybe that's enough to break a curse built on separation and loss. Before she could respond, his lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of eternity and starlight. But this wasn't the passionate claiming of earlier, this was a sacred vow, a willing surrender of everything they were to something greater than themselves. I love you, he whispered against her mouth, his voice breaking with the weight of 3 centuries longing. More than my existence, more than my power, more than the throne I've held for a millennium. I love you beyond death, beyond reason, beyond the very laws that govern our world. And I love you, she replied, her divine nature singing in harmony with his alpha soul. In every incarnation, in every life, in every death. I choose you, Lysander. I choose us. She bit down on his neck at the same moment his teeth found her throat, their marks blazing with silver and gold light as the mating bond snapped into perfect completion. Power exploded from them in a shockwave that shattered the boundaries between realms, their combined essence creating something that transcended both divine and mortal nature. For one impossible moment, Sera felt their souls merge completely. She was him and he was her, their love and pain and hope unified into something that blazed like a newborn star. Through their perfected bond, she could sense every wolf across the globe, could feel the curse that had plagued the supernatural world for generations trembling at the edges of dissolution. But as the light faded, she realized with growing horror that nothing fundamental had changed. Morgana still stood wreathed in shadows, her power undiminished. The curse still hung over them like a blade, and their completed bond, while magnificent, hadn't been enough to break the cycle of sacrifice that had defined their love story for 3 centuries. Beautiful, Morgana said with genuine appreciation, her ancient eyes studying their blazing connection with the interest of a scholar. Truly beautiful. And completely irrelevant. What do you mean? Sera demanded, silver light crackling around her as she prepared for another assault. Don't you understand yet, little goddess? The witch's smile was terrible in its satisfaction. The curse was never meant to be broken by completing your bond. It was designed to be fulfilled by it. You and your mate together are the solution. Your willing sacrifice is what will save the supernatural world from the chaos I've unleashed. The truth hit Sera like a cosmic thunderbolt. The prophecy, the reincarnations, even her divine nature, all of it had been leading to this moment, when she and Lysander would be strong enough, unified enough, to make the ultimate choice between their love and the safety of everyone they cared about. The curse will end, Morgana continued conversationally, when one true mate willingly dies to save the other, and that survivor uses their grief to power a spell of such magnitude it rewrites the very foundations of supernatural law. Your perfect love story was always meant to end in perfect sacrifice. Around them, the battle raged on, but Sera barely noticed. She was staring at Lysander, seeing in his golden eyes the same terrible understanding that was dawning in her own mind. They had found each other across centuries, had defied death itself to be together, had completed the bond that made them one soul in two bodies. And now, to save everyone they loved, one of them would have to choose to die. No, Lysander said fiercely, his power flaring as he rejected the cosmic equation that demanded their separation. There has to be another way. There's always another way. Is there? Morgana raised her hands, and the very air around them began to coalesce into something solid and lethal. Let's find out, shall we? The final spell she had been building throughout their battle reached its crescendo, centuries of accumulated dark magic focused into a single, devastating attack. It came at them from all directions simultaneously, a weapon forged from pure malice that would utterly destroy anything it touched. But it was aimed with surgical precision, designed to strike both Sera and Lysander at once while leaving just enough time for one of them to throw themselves in front of the other. Their completed bond meant they could sense each other's intentions perfectly, could anticipate each other's movements with flawless accuracy. Which meant they both began moving to sacrifice themselves at exactly the same instant, their perfect unity about to become the instrument of their mutual destruction. Time slowed as they reached for each other across the infinitesimal space that separated them, both desperate to be the one who died, both determined to save the other's life with their own. The killing spell hung in the air between them like a dark star, waiting to claim whichever soul proved fastest in their race toward sacrifice. And in that frozen moment, Sera finally understood what the prophecy had really meant about true love requiring the willingness to lose everything. Sometimes the greatest act of love wasn't dying for someone, but letting them choose to die for you. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 8. Time crystallized into a single, perfect moment of impossible choice. Sera and Lysander reached for each other across the heartbeat of space that separated them, both desperate to be the shield that would save their beloved's life. Their completed bond meant they could sense each other's intentions with flawless clarity, which made their mutual sacrifice attempt both inevitable and cosmically absurd. No, I will, Sera began. Let me, Lysander said simultaneously. I love you more. Impossible, because I love you. This is my choice. This is mine. Morgana's killing spell hung between them like a dark star, waiting to claim whichever soul proved fastest in their race toward sacrifice. But as they reached for each other with identical determination to die, their fingertips touched across the space between them. The moment their skin made contact, everything changed. The universe itself seemed to pause, cosmic forces suddenly grinding to a halt as they encountered something unprecedented in the laws of creation, two souls so perfectly unified that they created a paradox. How could one true mate sacrifice themselves for the other when both were simultaneously making the same choice? What, Morgana began, her ancient certainty cracking for the first time in centuries. The killing spell, designed to destroy one life while sparing the other, simply broke. Dark magic that had been building for 300 years encountered an impossible equation and collapsed in on itself like a dying star. The energy didn't dissipate, instead, it reflected back on its caster with compound interest, striking Morgana with the full force of her own malice multiplied by cosmic justice. No, the ancient witch screamed as her stolen power began to unravel. This is not how the story ends. One must die. The curse demands sacrifice. The curse, came a voice like silver music and starlight, got exactly what it asked for. The moon goddess materialized in the ruined courtyard, her divine presence making even the destruction around them seem beautiful. She looked at Sera and Lysander with infinite love and equally infinite sadness. My daughter chose sacrifice, she said simply. As did her mate. They gave up everything, their lives, their future, their very selves, for each other's happiness. The universe has never encountered love quite so perfectly selfless. But we're not dead, Sera said wonderingly, staring at her hands as silver light danced beneath her skin. No, the moon goddess agreed. You're something new entirely. Power erupted around them, not destructive this time, but transformative. Sera felt her divine nature reshaping itself, while through their bond she sensed Lysander's immortal essence shifting into something altogether more precious and fragile. What's happening to us? Lysander asked, his voice already changing, becoming warmer and somehow more human. You chose each other over everything else, the moon goddess explained. Your power, your positions, your very natures, you were willing to surrender it all for love. So love is what you shall have. The transformation reached its crescendo. Sera felt her goddess nature settling into something sustainable, still divine, but bound by choice to mortal limitations. Lysander's immortal strength flowed out of him like water, replaced by something infinitely more valuable, the promise of a natural lifespan shared with his beloved. He becomes mortal, the moon goddess announced, losing his alpha king power but gaining the gift of growing old with you. You become the new moon goddess, but choose to experience mortal life at his side. You will live together, love together, age together, and when death comes naturally, you will be reborn together, not as separate souls seeking each other across centuries, but as one soul in two bodies, finding each other again and again by choice rather than cosmic compulsion. Around them, the supernatural forces that had been locked in battle began to settle as the curse's power structure collapsed. Morgana, stripped of her stolen magic, found herself trapped in Vivian's mortal form, beautiful still, but utterly powerless. This isn't over, she spat, but her voice held none of its former authority. Actually, Kieran said, appearing with a squad of loyal pack members, it really is. He gestured to the former witch with obvious satisfaction. Vivian Ashford, you're under arrest for, well, everything really. Terrorism, murder, impersonating a Luna candidate, conspiracy to commit regicide, and I'm pretty sure identity theft counts when you steal someone's body. You can't arrest me. I'm a mortal woman with outstanding warrants in 7 different jurisdictions, Kieran finished cheerfully. I've already arranged for your transfer to the Supernatural Crimes Division. I hear they have excellent customer service opportunities in their rehabilitation program. As Vivian was led away in custody, still protesting her reduced circumstances, Sera couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. There was something poetically just about a centuries-old witch ending up in a call center. Now then, the moon goddess said, turning back to her transformed daughter and son-in-law, you have choices to make. Sera, as the new moon goddess, you could reclaim your castle, rebuild the royal pack, rule over the supernatural world as is your birthright. Sera looked at Lysander, really looked at him. The immortal Alpha King was gone, replaced by a man who would age and laugh and worry about perfectly ordinary things. He was still devastating handsome, still carried himself with innate authority, but now there were laugh lines around his eyes and a softness to his expression that spoke of freedom from the weight of eternal responsibility. What do you think? She asked him. I think, he said slowly, that I've been the Alpha King for over 1,000 years. I've fought wars, made laws, carried the weight of our entire species on my shoulders. And do you know what I want more than anything? What? To learn how to make you breakfast in the morning without burning down the kitchen. To argue with you about whose turn it is to do laundry. To fall asleep next to you every night knowing I'll wake up beside you every morning for the rest of our perfectly ordinary, beautifully mortal lives. Sera felt her heart, mortal now, but still divine in its capacity for love, swell with such joy she thought it might burst. Then that's what we'll do. Excellent choice, the moon goddess said with a smile that could have lit up the cosmos. Though you might want to hurry. I believe Kieran is about to inherit some rather significant responsibilities. 7 months later, Seraphina Blackwood Nightfall stood in the kitchen of a tiny cottage on the outskirts of a human town, flour dusting her dark hair and a mixing bowl balanced precariously in her arms. Through the window, she could see Lysander in their postage stamp garden, swearing creatively at a cucumber plant that was apparently not growing to his specifications. It's supposed to be relaxing, he called through the open window. Gardening is supposed to be therapeutic. Maybe try talking to it nicely instead of threatening it with supernatural retribution, Sera called back, trying not to laugh as she watched her formerly immortal husband shake his fist at a vegetable. I am talking nicely. I told it very politely that if it doesn't start producing cucumbers soon, I'll replace it with something more cooperative. That's not what talking nicely means. Well, how was I supposed to know? For 1,000 years, everything did what I commanded out of fear. This gardening business has a completely different rule set. Sera was still laughing when someone knocked on their front door. She wiped her floury hands on her apron, an actual apron, which still amused her to no end, and went to answer it. Kieran stood on their doorstep, looking haggard and desperate. His hair was disheveled, his clothes rumpled, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of too little sleep and too much responsibility. Thank gods you're here, he said without preamble. I need help. Desperately. Hello to you too, Kieran. What's wrong now? What's wrong? His voice climbed toward hysteria. Everything. The vampire covens are demanding reparations for some insult I apparently gave their prince, though I swear all I said was that his cloak looked fancy. The Fae courts are threatening to close their borders because I accidentally agreed to a trade agreement that apparently gives them exclusive rights to all the moonflowers in the Northern Territories. And don't even get me started on the dragon situation. Dragon situation? Sera asked, fascinated despite herself. There's a dragon. It's claimed the old royal treasury as its hoard. It won't let anyone in to collect taxes, and it keeps sending me very formal complaint letters written in what I think is Latin but might be ancient Sumerian. From the garden came the sound of Lysander's continued negotiation with the plant life. Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but my patience has limits. Is he arguing with the vegetables again? Kieran asked weakly. Cucumber plant, Sera confirmed. It's being uncooperative. Would you like some tea? I would like my former Alpha King back, Kieran said plaintively. I would like him to deal with the dragon and the vampires and the Fae and especially the 3 different werewolf packs who keep challenging my authority because I, quote, lack the proper gravitas for leadership. What did you tell them? That gravitas is overrated and they should try being nice to people instead of intimidating them into submission. Oh, Kieran. I know. I'm terrible at this. He ran his hands through his hair, making it stick up at even more chaotic angles. Please, Sera. I'm begging you. Come back. Both of you. The supernatural world is falling apart without proper leadership. Through the window, she could see Lysander had given up on reasoning with the cucumber plant and was now attempting to coax it with what appeared to be encouraging gestures and possibly a few bribes in the form of premium fertilizer. Kieran, she said gently, look at him. Really look. When's the last time you saw Lysander that relaxed? Kieran followed her gaze to where the former Alpha King was now apparently singing to his vegetables, a lullaby, from the sound of it, completely off-key but with tremendous enthusiasm. Never, Kieran admitted quietly. I don't think I've ever seen him just happy. He spent 1,000 years carrying the weight of the world. Now he gets to worry about whether we can afford new curtains and if the neighbor's cat is getting into our trash again. He's learning to be human, Kieran. We both are. But the dragon will probably be very impressed if you bring it a really nice gift and ask politely instead of demanding submission, Sera suggested. Dragons appreciate good manners. And the vampires? Send them a formal apology and maybe some nice wine. Vampires love wine. The Fae? Renegotiate the contract. They respect clever wordplay more than raw power. Kieran stared at her for a long moment. You're really not coming back, are you? No, she said softly. We're not. But you don't need us, Kieran. You just need to stop trying to be Lysander and start being yourself. The supernatural world could probably use a leader who leads with kindness instead of fear. What if I mess it up? Then you'll learn from your mistakes and do better next time. That's what mortals do. She smiled. Trust me, I'm an expert now. After Kieran left, still looking uncertain but marginally more hopeful, Sera returned to her bread making. Through the window, she could see that Lysander had apparently reached some sort of détente with the garden, as he was now contentedly weeding around plants that seemed to be cooperating much better. How did negotiations go with Kieran? He called. He wanted us to come back and fix everything. And what did you tell him? That we're retired and he should try asking the dragon nicely. Lysander appeared in the doorway, dirt smudged on his cheek and a satisfied smile on his face. Excellent advice. How's the bread coming? I may have added too much flour. Again. We'll figure it out. We have time to practice. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder to peer at the mixing bowl. His hands, once capable of tearing apart enemies with supernatural strength, now bore the small cuts and calluses of someone learning to work with wood and earth and other beautifully ordinary things. Any regrets? He asked softly. Sera leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his now mortal heart. Outside their window, the world continued its eternal dance of politics and power and supernatural drama. Inside their tiny kitchen, flour dusted the counters and the bread might be a disaster, and they had exactly $17 in their checking account until her next paycheck from the community health clinic. It was perfect. Well, she said, laughing as she turned in his arms and saw the flower she'd somehow managed to get in his dark hair, we did say we wanted a quiet life. Lysander's smile was radiant as he leaned down to kiss her, flower and all. For the first time in 300 years, for the first time in a millennium, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Tomorrow would bring more bread-baking experiments and garden negotiations and probably another visit from Kieran with some new crisis that they would politely but firmly refuse to fix. Tomorrow would bring them one day closer to growing old together, something he'd never dared to dream possible. Tomorrow will be beautifully, perfectly, ordinary. And that, they both agreed as they kissed in their tiny kitchen while the bread definitely burned in the oven, was the greatest magic of all. I know you enjoyed this video. Wanna watch more videos like this? Do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. I would also love to hear your thought in the comments section below and share this video with family and friends. The end.